about the actual sponges you see today, or the phylum Porifera. The earliest appearance of sponges is found in fossils, which are 650 million years old. This dates to the time, say, when the first true proto-animals are also found. Hence, it's difficult to decipher if they evolved from proto-animals or, they had a different beginning altogether. As you can see, the tree behind me, there's a big question mark there. There are around 8,000 different extant species of sponges. Note that I said extant and not extinct. Extant means, in a very fancy way, indicate that they're still around today. The opposite of extinct. So most sponges are marine dwelling, meaning they love to live in salt water. But since we always tell you, biology craves to have exceptions for everything, especially if it's the case of sponges, they just don't seem to do anything that animal does. You've got an exception in a sponge as well. You've got freshwater sponges along with marine sponges. So there are even sponges which look beautiful. They look like they're made out of glass. That's why they're called glass sponges. Sponges are quite awesome because they have survived and retained almost the same form and function for 65 crore years. And they've also endured 5 mass extinction events. So something tough in these guys, right? That they're there even today. So this is actually proof that life adapts superiorly to the environment, and once it actually does that, they bounce back from the smallest fragments. Well, bounce back from fragments? Yes, literally in the case of sponges. So even if you cut a sponge into a million zillion pieces, each one of those tidbit pieces can form a fully functional life sponge once again. Even worse, if you squeeze one of them, the resulting, goo can still form sponges. Imagine doing that to a human. Sponges have not acquired motility, which means they don't move. Because of that, they're called sessile organisms. And this is also a criteria that, obscures them from animals. Because when I say think movement, think animals, right? But then these guys are like, they just have to be an exception to every rule. But looking at the success and their time on Earth, it actually looks like they're better off without it. Speaking about the classification of sponges, they're quite distinct from other animals because they're the only ones who exhibit just a cellular level of organization. Remember our chart? Yes. A sponge can just be said to be a weak aggregate of cells. They do not form tissues, but they're held together by a jelly-like substance. It's called mesohyl, a property which it's going to share with its sisters. You're going to learn about its sisters next. The ctenophores and the cnidarians. Around 10 to 12 different types of cells exist in a sponge formation. This word is justified because this is basically what the structure of a sponge is. A number of cells get together, ooze out a jelly, hardens, keeps them together, attached to something. That's it. That's how a sponge is formed. Simple, right? Really, really simple. Cells called sclerocytes secrete collagen, other required polysaccharides which harden and form structures called spicules, which give form to the sponge. You can say it forms the skeleton of the sponge. They also take the shape of spines, which may offer, protection against some threat, right? This allows the sponge to develop an efficient water canal system, and this is how a sponge operates and functions. So you can see how it's actually happening over here. The outer layer is going to have minute pores. These pores have a name. Yes, the minutest pores have a name. It's called ostia, which goes into a central cavity, which also has a name, spongiocele. Sounds familiar? Yes. And this one opens up to a common opening, which is called the osculum. This also shows how the sponge feeds on bacteria and other microbes and food particles. But few have actually evolved to predate on small crustaceans. Water is taken in, through the pores, guided by choanocytes, lines these intricate canals, central cavity. You've got cilia-like appendages on these cells, holding these food particles, which are then engulfed and digested. And this mode of digestion, since it's happening inside a cell, it's called intracellular. This pathway or system also fulfills respiration and excretion. It's the same thing. Very, very simple. So sponges, as I told you before, can regenerate from the smallest cell fragments. Therefore, If I take a sponge here, it can reproduce like this. Fragmentation. Pretty obvious name for what they do. They break up into fragments. They also reproduce by sexual means, where the same sponge produces both the male and the female gametes, making it what you call a hermaphrodite, and releases